Welcome to Earth to the Other Side. My name's John. I'm your host, and tonight I'm speaking with John Mathis, who had his NDE back in 2006 and various other STEs that we'll discuss in this interview. John, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much.
You know, generally speaking, people want to hear about your near-death experience, so why don't we just jump right into that?
Oh, it was 2006. I was playing Mr. Mom Monday through Friday. My wife traveled for work, so she would fly out on a Monday, and I was doing my best to be Mr. Mom. Was also going to nursing school, and my wife and I had a company together, so was keeping myself pretty busy, and got bronchitis and ignored it. Tried to power through, and then that became pneumonia, and tried to power through, and was at a doc in the box. And they did an oxygen sat on me and did a lung x-ray. And he's like, you've got whiteout in all 5 lobes, which means you've got so much crap in your lungs that it's actually reflecting back on the x-ray. So he's like, you should probably go to the doctor. And I'm like, okay, I'll go to the doctor. And instead I went home, kind of stubborn, really stubborn, I guess, maybe. So I went home, got up the next day, and went to see my endocrinologist. Or my diabetes doctor. And she looked at me, and what I didn't know was that her husband was an infectious disease doc. So she looked at me and she says, I'm calling my husband. And I'm like, why are you calling your husband? I don't even know you, lady. So I was, quote unquote, directly admitted to the hospital. So again, it was, we've already sent your information over. They will be expecting you. Go directly. Do not pass go. So I went home and had myself a proper English breakfast, had my super strong coffee because I'd worked in a hospital, not as a nurse at that point, but I worked in a hospital long enough to know that what the patients got as coffee was kind of like coffee or at least warm water with a brown crayon dipped in it. So I wanted my good meal. Now, when I drove home or when I drove to the hospital, I remember leaving and I remember getting there, but I don't remember anything in between. I remember driving around looking for a place to park. And then the next thing I know, I'm in the emergency room. And it was like consciousness was kind of like a stone skipping on the water. And I just had like this little snippets of, yep, I remember that. But then I had no idea how I got to the next thing. The next memory I have was I'm sitting in the emergency room. The doctor has a piece of paper in front of me and he's handing me a pen. My wife at the time was there. I have no idea how she got there or who called her or what the deal was. But the doctor then like drew an X and then drew a line so that I would understand, oh, I need to sign something. So I signed it, and then the next thing I know, it's 14 days later. What happened was my oxygen sat at the time was, I think they said 68%. And to put that in a frame of reference, anytime your oxygen saturation is 90% or lower, they put that nasal cannula or that hose on you. Why I was conscious, they have no idea. There was a lot of things will come into this story that was basically, we don't know how you did that. So they intubated me. I was diagnosed with ARDS, acquired respiratory distress syndrome. I was put into a medically induced coma, and they were hoovering out my lungs about every 20, 30 minutes because they were just filling up with fluid. ARDS is weird in the sense that it somehow signals the rest of your body to the other organ systems that, hey, if you want to check out, you can. So after my lungs shut down, my kidney shut down. And I blew up to about 450 pounds. So much so that I had what they call third spacing, where fluid builds up in between the tissues of your body. And it was so bad, I actually had blisters in my eyeballs. The fluid was just trying to find some place to go. And then with all that fluid overload, then my heart failed. The top of my heart, or the atria, failed. So with heart, lung, and kidney failure, it's kind of like, knocking on heaven's door. The funny thing is that I have had previous experiences with remote viewing or out of body experiences. And so while I was in my coma state, my consciousness was actually above my bed. If you could attach a camera to the head of my bed and then extend it up maybe about 8 feet, that's where my consciousness was. So I can like pan and scan the entire room. And I was having fun with it, actually. The nurses were coming in and talking, and they were like, "Oh, this guy's a nursing student, and he's got his mom and his wife here," and they were trading backstories of kind of like shift changes and things. And then my wife and my mother, who despised each other, were in the same room, but they were at the most opposite ends of the room they could possibly be. And so again, my consciousness is looking at this as like, you guys hate each other. You have to sit in the same room. This is kind of funny. I'm enjoying this. But when my wife's cousin's wife with stage 4 lung cancer came to my bedside to wish me goodbye, that's the first time I realized, oh, this is kind of serious. All right, well, maybe I need to pay attention. But little idiosyncrasies would come up later that I would call out to family, and they were just like, how do you know that? You were in a coma. But it's like my daughter was, I think, 15 at the time. And so she wanted to twist my hair up and put it in little barrettes. She wanted to paint my toenails. They were trying to debate what's music I would like to listen to, because they had read somewhere that hearing is still intact, or one of the first things to come back in a coma. So I remember them having that debate. I remember them saying that they decided on James Taylor to play for me. So I remember my mom making a comment about, I never realized how much hair he had growing in his ears. Something only a mother would say to you, So all these little things that I would not know being in a coma, but I did. So had that process. About 13 days later, they were able to back me off. The organs slowly came back online again. And, the peculiar thing is that they never discovered what made me sick. Nor did they discover what was it that actually helped me turn the corner, because they threw the kitchen sink at me. And they were chasing down things like, again, so my diabetes doctor's husband was an infectious disease doc. And so because he was part of my story, he stayed involved. So it's like, well, he's got pneumonia because his lungs are flooding, but what's causing that? And they ran blood test, negative. Well, he's got some sort of a virus. No, he doesn't. Well, maybe it's a fungal infection. No, it isn't. So then they're chasing it down. Well, maybe it's Legionnaire's disease. I mean, they really were going for exotic stuff because none of the normal stuff was coming up, and it was never explained. What I did find interesting, though, was that about 3 or 4 weeks before the coma, I was having, a divorce was impending. And in my journal, I wrote, I wish I could just go to sleep, wake up, and this would all be over. So careful what you wish for, kids, because you may just get it. So anyway, so I was extubated. I came back onto room air. My kidneys turned back on. My heart kind of got into synchronous rhythm again. So it looked like a blip on the radar. So they moved me to a step-down unit, and I'm lying there in bed, and I'm thinking, this sucks. This was as close as I could have probably gotten to a death state. And I didn't have a near-death experience because I'd read about them. And again, having had outer body experiences as a remote viewer, I kind of thought it would be something like that, but I just didn't know. And I thought, God, this sucks. I mean, how how can I get this close to death again? And me being me, I'd be like stepping on a banana peel and, just fall into the other side. And oh crap, I didn't mean to go all the way. So as I'm lying there, just kind of drifting off to sleep, then it happened. And so on one hand, it doesn't make sense because I was out of harm's way, so much so that they had removed the devices that were keeping me alive. But on the other hand, maybe I've been astral projecting or remote viewing since I was 14 years old. And so maybe the membrane between the two spaces was perforated. I don't know. But I had the traditional stuff. I went through a white tunnel. I had a sensation of flying without air disturbance. I met my grandparents. I met patients who I'd worked with who had been deceased. I saw my childhood pet dog. So all of those like traditional things you see in near death. Then it took a curve on me because this was not in any of the books I read. I was in this white space and I saw something whiter than white. And there was nothing in there to determine whether this white thing was teeny tiny and right in front of my forehead, or if it was the size of a Mack truck and was a mile away, because there was nothing to judge distance. But it was something. And I said, "What are you?" And it came back at me, "I'm everything." And I said, "Well, that's cool." And again, speaking over there is done in thought. I'm sure your audience already knows this, but in case someone stumbles across, I said, "Well, that's cool." And then all of a sudden it was just like right in front of me. And all I could see was this brighter than bright white light. And so I'm like just kind of staring at it. And all of a sudden this silver tendril came out and just kind of boop, hit me in the third eye. And it was like the paparazzi all started taking flash pictures of me because it just this flash of white. And I just felt like this data stream start. And once I kind of settled into it, then it was like, "He's ready." And then another increased push. And then it was kind of like it went to kind of one of the spotlights you'd see at like a mall opening or a premiere or something like that. And then I accommodated to that data stream. And then it was like, okay, he's ready. And I turned around and instead of seeing God, Jesus, Kuan Yin, Buddha, whatever, I saw the comedian George Carlin. And the curious thing about that was that George Carlin was not dead. So now I have this whole Contact movie thing. I'm like Jodie Foster, her father was deceased, but when she saw the aliens, they took on the representation of her father. And the rationale was, we want to show you somebody that you won't be threatened by because the message is important. So I didn't know George Carlin. I just knew of him. I watched him on TV, and he and I are very similar in the sense of, he said, "I was Catholic until I reached the age of reason." And I was kind of in that tangent too. I went to Catholic grade school, high school, and college. But around my senior year, I'm like, this is all kind of bull, but I'm going to play along just because I just don't know, But I finally got to a point where I could look at him and he was like, "Here we are." I'm like, okay. He's like, "Come on, I got some cool shit I want to show you." And I'm like, all right. So he was like showing me how fractals represent the universe. And I know our time's limited here, but there was a download, and then there was another download, and it was all like on different subject matters with, why am I here? And it was basically to course correct. Why am I on Earth? Well, because you're going to be the bridge between left brain and right brain thinking when it comes to metaphysics and all those things that kind of fall into transpersonal psychology. Like, okay, well, couldn't you have sent someone, better qualified than me? And they're like, "Yeah, you've actually been doing this for several lifetimes, so you're qualified." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So then the next scene I had in my head is I'm standing in the middle of a soccer pitch. or a soccer field, and I'm looking around, and the stadium just goes up and up and up and up into the clouds, and I'm looking down at the crowd, and I'm seeing every race, every generation. It was like Central Casting had a sale for every costume they ever had. So I'm seeing togas, and I'm seeing zoot suits, and I'm seeing dresses, and everybody was there. And I'm seeing some things that aren't people. They looked like silver surfboards or opaque surfboards that just kind of glowed and just kind of pulsed. So all of this is in the audience, and I realized, holy shit, I'm studying in a Quidditch pitch from Harry Potter. And if you've ever seen the Harry Potter movies where they talk about the World Cup, you'll understand the stadium and how it goes up into the clouds and everything. So George texts me, he goes, "Hey everybody, this is John." And the whole place goes, "Hi, John." And John is from Earth. And the whole place goes, "Ooh." And I'm like, "Why are you oohing?" And immediately information comes back. Earth is hard. You don't go to Earth. You have to be selected to go to Earth because you've got physical places that exist. You've got energetic places that exist. And Earth is one of the few places where you can be both, but you also have duplicity. People will lie to your face and they'll smile and they'll be so convincing. And if you're not used to it, it'll throw you a curve. And the other thing that was shown to me was like, it's an amusement park in the sense that if you want to focus on a thing or have an experience of a thing, then that thing is there. So if I want to experience racism, there's plenty of racism rides. If you want to experience poverty, there's plenty of poverty rides. And so you can basically pick and choose your own adventure depending upon what you focus on. And I'm like, okay, so in my mind, it's kind of like you're over here in heaven or Akashic Records or, whatever, noun you want to give it. But you do all your study over there, but you don't actually get to deploy it until you're in the laboratory. And if you've advanced far enough, the laboratory can be Earth. So it's like I can read about baking a cake, but then I can try to bake one and burn my kitchen to the ground. And welcome to Earth. You just had that experience. So I'm like, okay, all right, I think I get it. And then it was like, I want to go exploring. And it's like, nope, you can't explore. You've got to go back. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to go back. This place is much cooler than back there. They're like, nah, you got to go back. And I'm like, why do I have to go back? And again, they talk in energy. So I have to convert that into English words. And the best I can come up with is spiritual paramedic. And again, that kind of makes sense to me in what was said earlier in that you need to be the bridge between left brain and right brain thinkers in the scope of metaphysics. So my day job, I'm a clinical data scientist. I'm an oncology nurse by training. I've been building databases for half a decade. I was a platform member of IBM Watson Health. So AI, machine learning, quantum computing, I had my fingers in all of that. But yet here I am, remote viewing, astral projection, having near-death experiences, chasing ghosts, past life regression. Why all this corpus of knowledge that should be so woo-woo in a meat suit that's running around playing clinical data scientist? So it seems that both sides of those pillars have been building over time of he's a smart cat and he's got his logic, but we're going to give him all this experiential knowledge so that he can be that bridge back and forth. And so that's basically what I've been doing and talking about since 2011 when, my mom's passing basically kicked my butt and said, okay, get moving. So I've written a couple books. I've done a bunch of talks. The people that like at Unity and Unitarian churches, they're pretty stoked about it. I've talked at death cafes a couple times. That's been pretty cool. But I've done research with ions. I've looked at about 300 case studies. I put together a database for them. Dr. Bruce Grayson actually presented my findings at a 2015 symposium. Ions is so focused, though, on the research and the evidence-based thinking. And I needed that initially to kind of get my legs back under me again. But then it was the nurse part of me kicked in. It's like, I've noticed people presenting with PTSD when they've had near-death experience. And then I discovered spiritually transformative experiences. And then it's like, okay, I'm seeing the template of these folks. And a lot of people, when they come back from this experience, they don't have their legs under them yet. And so I started calling it reentry turbulence from, when you come back from space, spaceships have reentry turbulence. Well, when you come back from space, people have reentry turbulence. So through Assist, I became a peer spiritual counselor. And then I ended up moving about 4 miles away from the Rhine Research Center in Durham, which is the mothership for ions. And I had no idea. And so the universe obviously was poking and pushing me in different areas. So that's where I'm at now, is that I feel now that I've been through the COVID and, turning the systems back on again like everybody else, I think it's more important now than ever than to share my story and be that bridge, because I think a lot of people who haven't started to think about their existential well-being, COVID has definitely written that check for them. So I'd like to come out and share what I know, and hopefully it helps them. And I appreciate you giving me the platform to do so.
Well, thank you very much, John, for sharing your story, and so interesting. I wonder, because outside of the George Carlin aspect, your experiences, represents a lot of the typical, I don't want to say typical, but some of the more standard
Yeah, you're right.
traits of an NDE, right? But
I left one part out. So I had this Encyclopedia Britannica of my experience that I just described that happened in 2005. In 2009, I got my master attunement into Reiki. And I was told by the person attuning me that Archangel Michael was there. I didn't see anything, but I was in a dining room that they converted into a massage studio. And it felt like there were 100 people in the room. It felt crowded. And it felt like I had an elephant sitting on my chest. It was hard to breathe. It was like compressed. That was 2009. In 2012, I just finished cleaning up my mom's condo and was getting ready to flip it on the market because I was her executor. And we'd been through a drought in Florida, and I woke up probably about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to the sound of rain. And I'm listening to the rainfall, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so beautiful. We're finally going to not have crunchy plants. And then all of a sudden I heard, again, trying to find English words to explain a heavenly thing. I heard like Enya background music, this ethereal, ooh, whatever kind of stuff. But there was an energy to it that kind of made me want to be out of body. And I'm like, what is this? Because usually going out of body is an intention that I set and not just something that spontaneously happens. And so I'm hearing this music, and all of a sudden the click happens. And that music was the same thing I heard when I was standing in the Quidditch pitch in 2005. Except my encyclopedia of experiences, I got handed like a couple more books, or like, oh, by the way, you had this experience too, and we're now going to give this to you. So in the Quidditch pitch, I heard the music, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And so I followed that music, and then I wanted to sing with it. And so I did. And I've been singing since I was 6 years old. I'm Johnny Mathis. I didn't have much choice in the matter. So I started singing with them. And as I was singing, I just felt like this tingling sensation and this growing and this expansion. I'm like, yes, I want more of this. But but I also kind of felt my humanness kind of falling away. At the same time, this expansion is growing. I'm like, give me more of this, please. And then all of a sudden I felt this tug on the back of my shirt that didn't exist. And they were like, no, not quite yet. It was like I was ascending or something. And I'm back on to the pitch, and I feel this heavy hand on my shoulder, and it spins me around, and I look, and I'm looking at Archangel Michael. He puts his other hand on my shoulder, and so he's got his hands on my shoulders, and he leans in, he goes, you belong to us now. Okay. So why that aspect of my near-death experience was not given to me in 2005, but was given to me in 2012, I don't know. So, and he's been in my, life or whatever since 2005, but my attunement in 2009 is when other people started recognizing him floating around. And that's the other thing too. I've gone to sell my books, and psychics will be there because it's this, fair or whatever. And they'll be like, dude, you've got an archangel following you around. And I'm like, yeah, I know, it's Michael. And sometimes it's a dude named Jophiel. But yeah, it's like, there have been 2 times now where I've been at metaphysical fairs selling my book. And I'll be sitting in a booth next to a psychic or something. And I've got to say, you're going to see a guy, you're going to see an angel, don't worry about it. And they're just like, that's the craziest shit I've ever seen. I'm like, yeah, my
so
life, dude.
Why do you think it is that he's hanging out with you on a regular basis now?
So he's part of my continual download. So it's kind of like, so going through a divorce will devastate you financially. And the last thing I wanted to do was try to make my living as a tarot card reader or as a Reiki master. I was, trained in pharmacology and nursing and oncology, and those things, 1, have a service to society, and 2, they make you a lot more money. And the IRS was already barking at me. So I was very practical and followed my left brain and did that. But every once in a while, I get too far into the weeds on the left brain, and I'll have a really vivid dream. And so, again, they're cheeky bastards, or I am, and they present this way. So Michael and or Jophiel in my dream will show up wearing a karate gi or ki or whatever that white jacket, oversized jacket, and white pants look like, and Birkenstock sandals. They show up on my couch and they're drinking my beer. And so in my dream, I hear a knock on the door. I answer the door, and there they are. They come and they sit down on the couch, and all of a sudden we're all sitting there drinking beer. And then it's like, okay, John, you've gone too far. You're not here to be a data scientist. You're here to do talks and write books and help people in their dark night. You've been through a lot of crap, so that when you encounter people who are going through their version, you can say, look, this is my situation. This is how I got through. You can too.
Since we were on the topic of Michael, I'm curious, can you describe what he looked like to you? I'm sure people are wondering.
To me, he was mostly male. There was an androgynous component about him. But the person I saw in front of me was kind of a Greek look, probably about 8 foot tall. Again, it looks like that he doesn't skip the gym, but at the same time, it wasn't obvious. He had a white, choir robe on, but he had bandolier across him, and the bandolier actually had glowing jewels in them. his whole countenance just had kind of a glow or radiance about it. And his wingspan would probably be as wide as my house. But again, he had them tucked behind him, so it's not like he just didn't say, "Look at these, man." It's just as tall as he was, and they kind of extended above his head, and how he was standing there talking to me. I just, mentally, I'm just making that assumption. But I've seen him in a couple of occasions. So this first presentation looked like that. The rest of his presentations, he's been just wearing this like karate outfit. There was one time when I was doing something stupid. I rephrase that. I do stupid things a lot, but this one time I did something particularly stupid. I went into a house and I tried to use Reiki to push out a haunting that was going on there. And there was a ghost of a little girl that turns out it wasn't a little girl. It was pretending to be a little girl. And it was something that has never been human. And it was going to eat my lunch. And I'm like, oh, hell, what have I gotten myself into? But I was filled with this sacred rage and repelled this thing. It literally stumbled back all of a sudden. And as it stumbled back, I felt the energy of Michael behind me. And so he was ripped and he was pissed. And he had a sword that was on fire. There have been 2 times where I was stupid and he showed up kind of, I would say, in battle formation or in battle readiness. But the rest of the time, he's just some dude that shows up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning while I'm dreaming or in a REM cycle to have a beer, sit on my couch, and it's like, come on, dude, you've got some to do, and you've been dragging your heels. So take that leap of faith. So this is me baby stepping my way to my leap of faith here.
So you said on the way, your journey to this realm, heaven, or wherever it was, you met your grandparents and some various other souls. So
Yep.
did you have any communication with your grandparents at that time?
Yeah, yes and no. So the way that it worked, or at least appeared for me, was that imagine a snowflake, but in the simplest configuration, like a kindergartner were to draw. What does a snowflake look like? And I'm at the center or the apex or the crosshairs of that snowflake. And so I saw like my grandparents. They were the first node or the first extension away from center. And then I saw my grandparents' neighbors who I knew, and they were friends, and sometimes they babysat me. Their next door neighbor, Mrs. Connington, made great cookies. And again, when you're 4, that's all you really need. So she was there. And as I kind of energetically explored this 2-dimensional snowflake, at each node was an energy that was a person. So my uncle that passed, node. My dog, a node. One of my patients I connected with who passed, a node. And so I just kept bouncing around the configuration and seeing this. And that's also one of the times I heard, he's got it. And then it became 100 times more complicated. Now we're 3-dimensional space, and it's more like a bush in a sense. And it's got all these little offshoots and all these little things. And it's like, I used to sing, and for the time I was 6 until I was about 17, I was singing for competitions and things like that. At 17, I started learning languages. By 19, I was singing opera. By the time I was 27, 30, I had sang in 3 different opera companies, and I was singing in 5 languages. So there were people in these nodes that were in the audience who were like moved by what I sang. But I never met them. I didn't know them. There was no kind of interrelation. It was almost like A Wonderful Life, where Clarence shows them that you're affecting people that you don't even know that you're affecting. And so, again, going back to Michael, get out of your house, stop writing on the computer, interface with people. Come on.
So you didn't have any direct, even telepathically, communication with either your grandparents or your former patient or anything like that?
There was no exchange of information, but emotionally or energetically, it was almost like a dog. When you come home, your dog runs up to sniff you. Not so much to say hello, but it's like, where you been? Who did you see? What did you eat? And just 2 or 3 sniffs and bang, it knows all that information.
True.
When I interfaced into that node, it was, I know who you are. I know what you were to me. I know the relationship. I know the story of where our paths crossed. But it literally took a millisecond for all that information to be conveyed. And I think that's part of the why then they were like that silver thread, and like they kept amping up, and it was like, can he take this much data? He can. Can he take this much data? He can. That's enough. Now let's download.
How much of this data did you bring back with you?
4 or 5 notebooks worth. And
really,
then when I got the downloads in 2011, 2012, another 3, I think, college ruled notebooks. And some of it was just for me and my personal development where I'd gotten off track. Because I'd been through the Cosmic Costco, the Akashic records. I had picked out the things, and it's like, yeah, let me redo this again, and let me try. Oh, this was fun. Let me try this again. Oh, I haven't tried this. Let me grab that. And so I was basically like a video game player, playing the same game I've been playing, but I chose a different character. I chose a different difficulty level, and I chose a different weapon. And now I was trying to go through Earth, that version again, but with a different skill set and a different challenge.
Before I get to my George Carlin question, you'd mentioned that at some point you began to see the this white light, this bright light, which got massive. And so how did you feel at that point? I mean, do you recall what was going through everything at that point of seeing this light? Was there a different feeling that came through as well, or no? Because a lot of people talk about unconditional love and they felt a serious vibration,
So at that moment, it was curiosity and wonder. And I've done a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have following curiosity and wonder, as opposed to sense of self-preservation. Like, don't go into that haunted house. Well, hell yes, I'm going to that haunted house. I want to talk to that thing, find out why it's pissed. Maybe I can make it happy. And if it's not happy, I'll push it out. So yeah, not following a lot of common sense sometimes.
What about the life review? You didn't have any sort of life review or retrospective in this experience, did you?
I didn't, and that was kind of a weird thing. I mean, the closest thing to a life review I got was, again, so it was like in the tunnel, and when I first got into this like large white space, or if you've seen The Matrix, the loading room, right before Keanu says, guns, we need lots of guns. It's just that big room of white. It's a room of potential. And so I went from, oh, hey, he's back, through that tunnel to in this loading room, or this big white room. And while I was standing there and again saw that whiteness, and then that thread connected, when that thread connected, that's when I had this like overwhelming sense of unconditional love. And the next thought was, that's what that feels like, because I hadn't felt it in this lifetime. And so to not so much know it, but to be reminded of it. to know that I already knew what that feeling was and to be reminded of it is very different than learning it for the first time.
So was it as indescribable as many NDEers say, that feeling?
So again, I've given some talks, and the way I come up with it is that imagine your most perfect birthday party you've ever had. Consolidate that joy down into 1 second. And with that compression, with that distillation of that joy and rapture, expand that moment out into infinity. That's what that feels like.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking awesome. You can understand why when you get back here, again, about half the people that come, according to a Pew Research thing that happened like in the 15, 16, roughly 10 million people a year have a near-death experience or a spiritually transformative experience. Half of those folks come back and they don't know what the hell to do with it. So that means 5 million people a year get hit with this blast of unconditional love and then come back here to this rock where it has no value. And then like, now what the hell do I do? How do I reintegrate into this?
Bring the value.
You try.
Yeah.
You try. But so the one of the things they mention in the research that I've done is, and again, this is everything from Bruce Grayson all the way back to Moody, is that you'll find people who have these experiences, they have a Control-Alt-Delete on their life. They end up getting divorced, start a new job, change their religion, move to a new town. They literally restart their life all over again. And if you don't choose that, it will be selected for you. It's almost like when I became a Reiki master, and the person who was attuning me during our coaching session, he said to me, he goes, "You are not agreeing to be a Reiki master. You are agreeing to be mastered by Reiki. And if there's anything in your life that won't match that frequency, it's going to get yanked. And if you don't let it go willingly, it's going to hurt even more as it gets ripped from you."
That's the great cycle of life, isn't it? It's just the same channel, same, journey up into enlightenment.
Dude, it sounds good as a bumper sticker, but when you got to live it, man, that's a high sphincter factor right there, buddy.
Most definitely. Yeah. So, George Carlin, so interesting. So obviously, I get the aspect of, present something that's familiar to you so that, your experience is just that much more valuable. But where do you think that, this came from? Because as you mentioned, he was still alive at the time. So where do you think this is conjured from? Is it your soul taking this information from you, or do you think it's coming from somewhere else and presenting this George Carlin? Because you could have asked some pretty intimate questions and then, try to get some validation with the living George Carlin if you wanted to, right? But I'm just curious what you think about that, what your thoughts are, because you actually were with the guy. So
yeah, I think my access to George in the human plane would have been pretty limited. I believe he passed in 2009, and I had my experience in 2005.
I think I introduced as 06, so my apologies.
Okay.
I thought I said 2006.
Yeah, it's 06. My bad. I think I saw George because George is someone who I didn't just admire, but he's someone I resonated with. Because I remember a conversation or an interview that he had where he came from an Irish Catholic family. I came from a German Catholic family. He actually had at one point considered becoming a priest. So did I. He was, quote unquote, Catholic until he reached the age of reason. I got in so much trouble in high school because I asked questions about my theology. And those weren't often met well. When I got into college, then I was allowed to kind of be a little more vocal, and that kind of deviation from norm was permitted because, college kind of allows you that, dexterity sometimes. But I think I saw George because I saw a kindred spirit. But I also think I saw George because I realized at a young age that if you can entertain people, you can teach people without them realize they're being taught. And in my childhood, I was an abused child. And I realized that if adults are laughing or they're entertained, I'm safe. So I think there was a couple of different vectors going on there that led to me seeing George. The other thing too is that if I had seen Jesus or Buddha or Kuan Yin or some sort of theological abstract, I would have rejected it out of hand. It was like, oh, this must have been some bad gas station sushi or something. If it would have been theological in its formation, I would have rejected it. And kind of like, who would you invite to your dinner party, your imaginary dinner party that you would, want to talk to? George would definitely be on that list. And so to have a message with the gravitas that was given to me, I think they were pretty smart in selecting George as a person to deliver that message. But that still begs the question, who's they? Who decided George? Who decided I shouldn't have all the information of my experience in 2005? That's the larger question. I still haven't peeked behind the curtain to see who the wizard is just yet.
Part of me feels like when you said that, of course, what do I know? But I mean, just, I'm just speaking out loud because you said that and my hairs, like the hair on my arms rose, and I was thinking, because when you said like, who are they? I also thought that just before you said that, I'm like, who are they? We always say that, and who are they? I'll get to my question, I'm sure. Or my point is that when you said that, I thought, maybe it's your higher self or, some other, portion of your consciousness that, maybe that was the they. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, so
that was really horribly expressed by me, by the way. I'm sorry, but
no, you've come at it pretty clearly. So this has been one of my mental chew toys for a long time, in the sense of, so after my experience, I was definitely grabbing into some psychology, and also, again, my left brain was trying to make sense of a right brain experience. And so I came across Jung and the collective consciousness, which to me set better in my psyche than the Christ consciousness, but it does have value. And one of the things I learned as a nurse, so sometimes I'd go into a room and my Reiki hands would just turn on. They would start getting tingly and they started getting bright red, and immediately I had to go look at my patient and see their profile. It's like, oh, you're Southern Baptist. Okay, so I go over to them and say, excuse me, ma'am, I noticed you're Southern Baptist. Would you mind if I did a prayer and did a laying on of hands? It's energy surrounded by a message, but the delivery can sometimes make the difference in whether or not you're willing to receive it or not. So as a nurse, I recognize the PTSD signs and symptoms, and I recognize them within the near-death group. And then when I pivoted from ions to assist, I saw it again with the spiritually transformative experience group. Just one had the pesky death thing and one didn't. But you both went through something that cannot be explained by normal, quote unquote, normal human experiences. And when you come back with that experience, you get rejected passively or aggressively by the support systems you grew up with. Again, family, job, religion, whatever. And so I went looking, where are other places where this goes to? And so the easiest thing for me to discover was the LGBTQ group, in the sense of I grew up one way, but then something happened. I revealed my true self. And then those support systems that I counted on now aren't there for me. So like, again, taking that PTSD template, it's like, ooh, where else can I apply this? I discovered abductees. So while I was living in Florida, it was a very short drive for me to go to Tampa, and there is a MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, a support group for people who believe they have been abducted or have seen a UFO, or whatever the UFO paradigm is. You saw it, you've seen it, they abducted you, they were in your bedroom playing Uno, whatever. So I went to UFO meetings and introduced myself, and I was like, I am not from your tribe. I had a near-death experience, but I'm also trying to make sense of this, and I'm a clinical researcher. And so here is the PTSD framework, and here's what applies to near-death. Here's what applies to a spiritually transformative. Here's what it applies to rape victims. Here's where I think it applies to you. What do you think? Oh my God, the stories I got from these people. Because I didn't have their experience, but I spoke their language. And I gave them a platform from which to share. Now, through that commingling of what I learned from them with my experience, I'm not sure that the near-death experience and seeing God is not dissimilar to there is a superior intelligence that chooses to pluck certain people out of Earth reality, superimpose a new operating system on those folks, and drop them back into reality to see if they can seed an improvement in the human condition. The parallel between a near-death experiencer, a spiritually transformative experiencer, and an abductee are uncomfortably similar. One happens at a physical level, one happens at a consciousness level. But the trauma, the recovery, the rationale, the message, the deployment, the Venn diagram is almost completely overlapped. And so I've had to reframe a lot of how I present the things that I present. Because again, I grew up in a Judeo-Christian household. Mom was Catholic, dad was Southern Baptist, and I went to Catholic school from start to finish. So it's easy for me to default back into that. But I have to follow the data. And the data shows me that there are striking parallels between the two, with the same outcome, desired outcome, being propagated.
At the end of the day, the question is the same. Life, Earth, what's beyond it? What's the reason for it, right? Thank you so much for sharing all this. We can go on all night, and I would love to actually,
Who brought the shrooms?
I would love to. I would love to get together again and talk more about this. I think it's really interesting, especially about the parallels and stuff. I think we can go deep into that. It's been a real blessing meeting you. Thank you so much for sharing everything on the
It's been a hootenanny, as they say here in North Carolina. I really do appreciate the opportunity, and
same here.
So many people get caught up in their day-to-day comic opera, but it's designed to make you focus on the comic opera. Because if you take a moment to look what's going on and realize that there's a lot of stages going on, there's a lot of plays, it's an amusement park, and sometimes you just need to get off the ride and be in that interstitial space in between rides and look what's going on and think,
holy shit, it's just a ride.
And also very important to try as many rides as possible.